The Black Pony. People often wondered afterwards what it was that had started an ordinary boy like Matha wandering the country. How it was that many people would look for him in times of trouble, why others feared him, and what had started the belief that he had links with dangerous forces. In fact, Matha was the least likely person to ever want to wander anywhere. None of what happened had ever been intended by him. His plan for his life was very simple. It was to work his family's land and live in cooperation with his neighbours, maybe one day get married and have a family of his own. That way of living had made his ancestors content, and it would do for him too. He wanted to trouble nobody and saw no reason to expect trouble from anybody. But the cruel obstacle on Matha's path first appeared one fine summer day when he was only 7. Matha was weeding a small patch of carrots in the garden behind the cabin where he lived with his mother. He suddenly felt a coldness over his entire body, and he started to shiver uncontrollably. He looked up, and a black cloud had darkened out the sun. He ran to his mother, who was breaking sticks for kindling. She felt his forehead and started fussing about him. She put her shawl over him, and it covered nearly his entire body, but it didn't make him warm. She was about to bring him inside when they heard a reedy, foreign voice from behind them. "Greetings, good woman." They both turned, and on the lane that ran near their cabin was the first view of the man they would come to know as Kerbal. He was long and stooped. His hair was black and tied tightly behind his head. His eyes, too, were jet black. He had a pointy beard. Over his shoulders was a long, black, womanly cape. Next to him, on his horse-drawn cart, was an unnaturally large black cat. Matha's mother seemed amused. She obviously thought he was some kind of travelling showman. Matha was terrified, and the shivering got much worse. "Blessings on you and your travels," said Matha's mother. "Can we offer you refreshment for your journey?" "What good have blessings ever done you, woman?" he asked with a rasping laugh that showed a mouthful of mangled yellow teeth. "Why don't you bring over that boy to me, as I'm in need of an apprentice, and he looks suitable." Matha ran inside and hid in the hay on the settled bed, next to the fire, until he heard the laugh disappear down the lane. Only then did his shaking stop. Kerbal must have known what a weak and greedy man the chief of their Finne was. Even though Kerbal came with 3 horse carts full of possessions, he was believed, when he claimed he was destitute and had lost everything when the sea in the north had washed over them. When he supplied the chief Flapeggin Owen with gold chains and entertained him with foreign wines and a shell that produced music, the chief was won over to Kerbal's sad story. The very next day, the chief announced that he was taking the best of Matha's mother's ground and giving it to a certain admirable farming gentleman. A council of the Finne was called. Some of the members objected that Flapeggin Owen had no power to take away property without good cause and without the council's approval. But he said, "A person more learned than any of you has made me see that land is nothing but a burden for a woman with no man about the place." Matha didn't know why his mother had no man about the place. It was just the way things were. He had never heard tell of having a father of any sort. Maybe he had none. But his mother had farmed their land as well as anybody else around, and even at that young age Matha knew that the injustice of losing the best of the family grounds to Kerbal was a blow from which he would never fully recover. Still, she said to Matha, "There is no use in you fretting about it, son. This is our lot now." Over time, other neighbours got used to Kerbal. Some worked for him, as he didn't like to get his hands dirty. "Kerbal is not so bad," they said. "He's a crafty fellow, true enough, but he's getting on well. He has built a tidy house, and his cows are fat and shiny. Who would begrudge the man that? It puts extra food on our plates. Matha and his mother had to get used to living from 2 little patches of boggy ground that had been left to them. Everything about their lot was bad. Even on a dry year, they couldn't get their ridges dry enough to plant anything in time. They had the smallest, smokiest cabin in the valley. Their cow was sickly, and they rarely had enough to eat. It was a daily struggle for them to keep their souls together with their bodies in this world. Matha's mother somehow always managed to keep a smile for him, saying, "Well, at least we still have each other, and there's nothing more Kerbal could want to take off us except the smoke of our poverty and the emptiness of our pot." He promised his mother that as he grew stronger, he would work hard to earn the respect of the chief and to get some more land on which to give her comfort in her old age. As Matha grew, he tried to keep out of Kerbal's way. He didn't know why he was the only one who felt strange whenever Kerbal was near. Not shaking anymore, but filled with fear and hatred. He tried hard to push these feelings away, so they could not drag him down into dark thoughts. Matha stopped telling people about these feelings after he overheard his neighbour say, "Well, it's understandable, of course. The young lad resents Kerbal because that used to be his family ground. He'll grow out of it." As it happens, Matha's peculiar instincts were very sharp. There was indeed much that was fearful and hateful about Kerbal. This sour gentleman was not from the north, or from any country that an ordinary person could inhabit. He was not one of them at all. In fact, he was a very dangerous person, with a great deal of badness seething inside him. His real trade was in the casting of spells that would cause great harm to others and great advantage to himself, and sometimes in casting malicious spells for no advantage to himself, only to satisfy his own malice. The name he had been known before that was Soile. The role of humble farmer didn't suit Soile, who was naturally quite a flashy, soft person, one who liked to boast of his wrongs and taunt his victims. The reason he was masquerading as a farmer was that he did not dare let his presence in the country be known. Soile had previously been banished for eternity from Erin by Fionn Micheál, sent to the 366th island of the cold North Seas as a punishment for attempting to blind and murder everyone in Tara. He had eventually escaped by making himself a boat from the pelts of young seals tied around driftwood. In all those early years of Matha's life, Kerbal, or Soile, did not dare tinker very much with spells and potions, knowing that if he accidentally relieved his true identity, the punishment would be a final one. Soile's great failing was that he was given to jealousy. He rarely made room for any other feeling in his head. Even when he had used his unexplained wealth to turn his new lands and home into the blessed place in that valley, with food and comforts in great abundance, it tore him when anyone else had the smallest bit of good fortune. He actually wanted all good fortune for himself. It was like a knife being twisted in his belly when he heard of another man's cow having fine twin calves. It put his eyebrows into knots of anger when neighbours saved good hay for the winter. It stung him like a wasp trapped in his tunic when a young couple on the hill overlooking his farm had a healthy child, even though he had several children of his own that he didn't care for. Nobody could tell the pain he lived with in not being able to use his powers to undo these good fortunes, or at least to balance them with very bad fortunes. As sure as the sun goes down in the evening, it was certain that at some point Soile's bitterness would again overcome him. Matha was 14 years old when the bony hand of Soile again reached him, and this time finally shoved his life off its course, forcing him onto his frightening and lonely path. It started the day a small black horse arrived, seemingly from the wooded hills that overlooked the valley. She was not a pretty pony by any measure. She had a long, round body supported by stumpy legs, a trailing tail and hairy feet. Both Matha and his mother fell in love with her the minute she stuck her crooked head into their garden. Matha's uncle came running in past her and warned them, "Don't go near that animal. She's wicked. There are people up the hill that tried to throw a rope over her to see if she could be got to do a few bits of work, and she bucked like a wild stallion and kicked them into the next field. Wicked." Neither Matha nor his mother had any ears for the warning. Their hearts had already melted in the large brown eyes of the poor ugly little girl. Matha thought her the loveliest little beast. When the two of them went to talk to her, they did not look hungry at her, assessing whether she had strength or stamina. They didn't speak about what kind of toil a pony like her might be got to do for them. Matha's uncle could not believe it when the pony stood still as Matha cleared the long knotted mane from in front of her eyes. Matha's mother commented on the perfect little white star on her forehead, and Matha scratched her in the places she wants to be scratched. She apparently took a shine to them. The same animal that had kicked and bucked higher than two houses when anybody else tried to tame her stood quietly while Matha stroked her and eventually got the courage to climb on her back. With no blanket or strap, the horse remained as gentle as an old cow, and Matha had only to whisper where he wanted the burly little girl to go. That little lump of a pony turned out to have the strength of 5 big draft horses. Soon they had the fine girl plough and grub their slightly better field, and it didn't knock a feather out of her. Matha tried to get her to help out on neighbouring farms as a favour to others who were a little better off than themselves, but the minute she was off their ground, she would revert to the wicked wild creature she had once been. With the aid of the little steedine, Matha dragged deep trenches to drain their wetter field. Then he ploughed it deep. By the next harvest, it was seen by everyone around that Matha and his mother had converted their soggy little piece of the worst of the land into the best land ever seen. They still had to work hard, but their fortunes had turned. And that winter, they had not alone had enough to feed themselves, but had extra grain to trade. For the first time in 7 years, there was extra in the pot to feed relatives and neighbours who would drop in to see them, keeping fairly wide of the pony when they approached. One day, the chief said to Kerbal, "You know, you're no longer providing the best wheat to my kitchens." Kerbal was incensed. When he stopped jittering, he shouted at the chief, "Fool, I told you to give me the best of that woman's land, not the worst. You tricked me, and you'll pay for it." "Easy there, friend," said the chief. "It's not the land, but the means they have of working it." That evening, Silas stood in one of his hilly fields, overlooking Matha's to see for himself, as the little horse pulled out 3 stumps without falter, clearing more of the adjoining scrubland for next year's ploughing. He went home grumbling to himself, to the point that he could think no other thoughts. It is unjust. It can't stand. Useless peasants who never tried to make anything for themselves, an easy life, happiness, to them that did nothing to deserve it. Why should they have that pony, when I don't have one like it? It can't hold. They don't even know how to work that little lump of a horse, leaving it to stand idle and eating whenever it pleases. It won't do. No, sir, Silas, sir. It will not do. He turned over and over in his mind all kinds of schemes to trick Matha's mother out of the little pony. On more than one occasion the use of a spell crept into his mind, but he managed to contain himself. He tried to talk calmly to himself. No magic needed here, Silas, sir. Harmless fools who have never even travelled as far as the hills behind their cabins could easily be dealt with by a well-walked fox like you, sir. No need to risk magic. That would be easy. Blow them up like seals, or set their straw roof alight with lightning, or cover them in worms that eat through to their bones. But no, I must not. He settled on something simpler. He went down to their cabin one evening and offered to buy the horse. He spoke very sweetly to Matha's mother. A lovely lady like yourself deserves rest and ease. You wouldn't need that little old pony, or to be working those bad fields at all if I had my way. I would happily supply you with all the milk and grain you need, and I'll give that string of a lad of yours well-paid employment on my land. All I need in return is that little buckety lump of a pony. You'd have no more trouble with it. That was a good offer. It was more than the biggest draft horse was worth, but Matha knew his mother wouldn't be tempted by it. They did not even need to talk to each other about it. They both appreciated the generosity that the still nameless pony had shown to them. They both knew that she was more their friend than their property. She was not theirs to give, and even if she had been, his mother would have starved rather than let an animal of hers into the hands of a man she suspected was capable of cruelty. Matha's mother said, "And isn't it lovely for me to receive such fine compliments from you?" "No more than you deserved," said Kerbal. "But surprising," she added, still smiling softly, "to hear such sweet words from a man who took my family land and has been farming it for 7 years without bidding me the smallest greeting in all that time." Kerbal's face soured. He stormed out, stopping to dribble a green spit onto their doorstep. Next he went to the chief. There he claimed that Matha's mother had reached an agreement with him to swap the horse for 2 bags of wheat, but that Matha had reneged on the deal. The feeble chief didn't doubt Kerbal's word, as he was still hoping for more gifts. He said, "Oh, well, no, we can't have that. That chap Matha is not old enough to make or break agreements with honourable men." "That's what I thought," agreed Kerbal. The chief sent 2 of his men to take the pony away by force. There was no way that Matha or his mother could stop the men. They were too strong to tackle, and besides, they apologised for the work they had been sent to do. The mare went quietly enough down the Boreen with the 2 men. But then she started a slight bucking that developed into well-targeted kicking. She turned very suddenly, and with a flick of a hind leg she cracked all the face bones of the unfortunate man who had been leading her. The other ran off. She sauntered back home. All of this was starting to give Kerbal a tight pain in his stomach. He knew this look that had come to Matha and his mother was something far out of the ordinary. His sharp nose smelled a rich vein of power behind it. It was the kind of great fortune that comes to only a few people anywhere in the world, and even then, maybe only once in a long lifetime. He simply could no longer swallow down the poison that kept bubbling from his gut, filling his mouth and nose with the bitterest fluids. He was no longer debating whether to go back to his old days. He was already decided. He was going to strip this awkward boy of his insolence and the peasant woman of her false pride. His thoughts had moved on to wondering how hard he could strike without unmasking himself. His delight would be to directly inflict painful death on the boy, who he was increasingly suspicious of, and to inflict such misery on the woman that she would go on her knees begging his help. Help that he would, of course, have to politely refuse. Their dying thoughts would be filled with pathetic respect for him. And the pony would come trotting to its rightful owner. "No matter, no problem," he kept mumbling. But Sawyer was not an entirely rash man. He knew that word of revenge so fine and swift might spread beyond the valley and bring unwanted attention on him. Instead, he decided to concoct a less obvious spell. A geis that would take longer to work, but would have the same effect in the end. He went to the secret pit beneath his home. There he hid wares of his ancient art. He sat in that dark hole for 3 days and 3 nights, canting and throwing ash in the air. The words he kept repeating were, "I, great soil, drain the enthusiasm from the black horse, every drop, and hide it in the 7 furthest fields of the country, where no ordinary peasant could ever find it." And with that, I, great soil, will not only restore the natural misery to that cabin, but make that woman's lot 7 times worse than it was before, so that she will wake up every morning with only one wish, that she had gratefully accepted the generosity of Kerbal the farmer. And every evening before she sleeps, she will cry for her boy. The boy will develop a restlessness that he cannot scratch. He will leave her to wander like a fool into the forests. There he will be eaten by the wolves. Over and over, rocking and inhaling the ash. Nobody helped him but Mara Fada, and she thought nothing of it at first. She was used to hearing him mumbling to himself as she glided silently over the treetops on her way to the river. But sure enough, as the canting started, the fine little horse in the neighbouring farm showed her first ever signs of weariness. She was out pulling a light cart with a few onions in the back, when Matha noticed her head droop. Matha didn't understand it. As the same lady could have pulled a load 100 times the size, without effort. He took her from the yoke immediately and let her out to the grass in the sunny laneway. The ailment only got worse. Matha brought her favourite sticky weeds from the hedge. She ate them and became even more wobbly on her big flat feet. After 3 days and 3 nights, the horse was no more than a shadow of herself. It took all her energy to stand up, and after a few minutes she would lie down again. She ate everything Matha and his mother brought, but it gave her no strength. She looked at them with weary, pleading eyes. They didn't know what to do. They consulted every handywoman and animal expert in the locality. Matha received all sorts of herbs to feed the creature. He was taught prayers and cants to say repeatedly over her. None of it made her better, and he was sure that some of it made her worse. They went back to doing all the farm work by hand. But now they were poorer than ever before because, as well as feeding themselves and their cow of little milk, they were of course feeding the pony. And she had developed a bottomless hunger. Matha's mother was puzzled. She said, "I've never seen before a person to develop a greater love of food when they're sick." In the end, Matha's mother was forced to go to work in the house of the chief, just so that she could get a small share of the leftovers from his table for her and Matha to eat. The chief took away their remaining land, all except a small strip of ground that nothing but bog cotton grew on. That was here the hailing horse resided. The land that they had drained and ploughed was given to Kerbal, who came to supervise as his men put his markers out. He looked down from his hooded chariot where his enormous cat sat beside him. He grinned broadly at Matha, saying, "I was sorry to hear your luck ran out, boy. That's the way with luck. It always runs out, and if you're riding it, you fail. Whatever will you do next, I wonder?" Of course, Sala knew better than Matha what the answer to that question was. The reason for his grin was that he knew Matha would shortly be overcome by the need to leave, and that the long-toothed protectors of the woodlands would then be relied on to finish Sala's work. Sala would wait a little time before curing the pony, who would be forever grateful to him, and work tirelessly for him forevermore. And if the pony was not grateful, Then he would at least have the pleasure of slitting its throat. But despite being very pleased, Sóile was still not completely satisfied. He had forgotten that the greatest satisfaction of doing a bad deed was in having people know you did it. People who did good seemed to get extra pleasure from remaining unknown. It was not so with doing bad. He remembered how fine he felt in the old days, when people saw his power and looked at him a new way. He loved the frightened, sneaky, admiring looks from people who swore they hated him. He would have liked the people of this valley to know that he alone was responsible for the fall in the fortunes of Matha's family. And at the very least, he would have liked to let Matha know that it was he who had broken him and his mother down. But he still could not risk exposing his identity. Instead, to humour himself further, Sóile put out the rumour that Matha and his mother had overworked and underfed the black horse till it was no longer able to stand up. This made Matha suddenly less popular with some people. People were fond of horses and thought that cruelty towards them was a black mark on a person. Some said, "Ah, yes, that young lad fell into good luck too young and too easy. He learned that anything that comes too easy in this life will always have a cost later." Others said, "I said it all along. He made some dark sacrifice to get that magical horse, but the magic ran out, and now look at him, worse off than ever. The horse has just gone back to being the same broken wreck it was when he first put his spell on it." With every passing day, Matha became more unhappy at his situation. He did not understand what was happening. He started wishing he had never seen the pony. It would have been so much better never to have had any good luck than to have it for a while and then have it whipped away. He knew he should stay. He knew his place was with his mother, but he had developed a terrible unease that he could not explain. He could not sit down for a minute. He kept walking around and thinking and thinking. He couldn't sleep at night. He had a buzzing feeling in his stomach all the time. The only thing that eased it was walking. He resolved then that he had no purpose in this valley of misery, or even in this world, until he had somehow figured out how to fix this wrong. He often heard a voice whispering to him that there was nothing left for him here, with his mother working day and night and the land gone. He took it into his head that the whispers were coming from the helpless pony, that she was appealing to him to go away and find a cure. He entrusted a young cousin to attend to the horse every day and to do any chores that could be done to help his mother. Then he set out from home with no idea where to go and no idea what a long journey lay before him, determined to come back only when he had figured out how to set things right. Little did he know, as he was thinking these thoughts, that he was fulfilling the next part of Sóile's curse. Matha didn't even know enough about the outside country to stop and think about the dangers facing a young fellow like him travelling alone. Of course, there were other ramblers on the paths and chariot ways, but not even grown men would travel unfamiliar ground without reliable company and reliable weapons. It wasn't that Matha was particularly foolish, but so anxious was he to travel away that whenever a thought of danger entered his head, he dismissed it, telling himself quite mistakenly that what was before him could not be worse than what was behind him. Matha had one small piece of luck, that Máire Fada was the one who had heard the canting of the magician. She is a notoriously difficult lady to get information out of, if asked for it, but she is very good at gathering and storing it. As Máire had gone along her way in the dark early winter evening, gliding down to the little river in the valley below, thinking only of how pleasant it would be to get a little trout inside her tummy before the moon rose, She knew there was something odd about the canting. She had never heard before of a farmer who would sit in a black hole in the ground, covered over with a few boughs and a bit of straw, making appeals to deities. In her experience, farmers knew right well that they might ask once, and if their prayer wasn't granted on the first ask, they might as well go and sing for it. They knew that Dagda and the others would only be laughing at them if they continued pleading. A good God, though he may be most of the time, he was never a gone born and had no sympathy for whining flattery, penances or repetition. Maura had been all the more surprised on spying the thin foreign man still hunched there as she wandered back overhead the next day to see what was going on at a pond on the other side of the hill. And there he was again the next evening, and so he remained for 3 days. She allowed that either he was a fool, providing the height of entertainment for Dagda, or it was no high spirit that this man was talking to. From the tidy cut of his farmstead, she guessed this one was no fool. In the following days, Father had heard others, thrushes and robins mostly, chirping about misfortune befalling the little horse up at Matha's place. She recalled that the gentleman farmer's cants had included something about a horse, so she suspected the connection. And not 10 minutes back, when she saw Matha heading out aimlessly from the home with no smoke, wearing nothing but a few torn garments wrapped around him, her cold heart had melted a little for him. She flapped slowly over across the sky and landed about 50 paces in front of him. She stood on one long leg as she watched him approach. "Where are you going?" she asked when he was 20 yards away. He was taken by surprise, not only at such talk coming from the beak of a crane, but because he was not used to anybody talking about a first greeting or bidding you good health, whether they meant it or not. "Good health to you, ma'am, but I don't know," he answered quietly. "Well, I hope you brought plenty of food, because it can take a long time to get there," she said. "You're right, madam," he said. "And you don't have to tell me I'm foolish for going, because I know I'd be foolish in someone's mind whether I stayed or went. I wouldn't waste my precious time to stop here and call you a fool. There are plenty who can tell you the obvious. I thought you might like to know that I heard a certain foreign farmer, a neighbour of yours, praying in curses for that horrible mule of yours. Oh, thank you for your advice. I'm sure there is some mistake, though. There is nobody in this valley with the power of calling spells, good or bad. That man is merely a farmer. Thank you anyway for being such a kind person." Old Maura was impressed by young people with manners, though she never set an example. She was sorry now she couldn't tell him more so as to extract more compliments. She said, "Farmer indeed, you harmless git. Listen, I can't give you anything to make an ugly nag better, but I can tell you that he sent the horse's life to the 7 furthest fields of this country. That I know, because I heard him. And I can tell you that to draw them back, you will need but one small clay bowl. That I know, because I am the best woman I ever heard of to store information." "Thank you very much, lovely, wise, elegant creature," said Matha. "Is there any possibility at all that you would know where I can get this bowl?" Maura fluffed up the feathers on the back of her neck. "Every possibility. It is in the possession of a woodsman who lives at the southern foot of Slieve na Mon. So go on now, for I'm finished." Yet she turned her other eye at him and continued talking. "If you don't mind me asking, how long do you think you'll survive before you make a bony, unsatisfying meal for the Machtira clan? Everywhere you're walking near the forest or through bracken, their sly yellow eyes will be observing. Allowing a little time to pass before tearing your guts and face from you, in case they'd be accused of being hasty eaters. They pride themselves on their manners, you know. A shiver went up Matha's back at the thought of the Mactira and their appetites. He knew as well as anyone why people gathered sheep and goats in behind safe, thorny enclosures at night, and why nobody wandered alone near the edge of heath or forest from dusk. It was not without cause that the wolves were allowed to call themselves Mactira, sons of the country. They have a preference for tender youngsters, you know, she said callously. Fresh meat walking alone. Better yet, without spear, sickle, or anything at all that might scratch their tatty fur. Are you not afraid? Matha could say nothing. He was so afraid. He'd heard from travellers that much of the countryside had the shade of trees and bushes, that there were few paths that didn't go through or near Mactira hideouts. And here he was, he realised, without a companion, a hatchet, or even a good sharp stick. Then she looked at him again. She must have mistaken his silence for secrecy. She inspected him with each eye alternately for a few minutes, and eventually said in a less mocking voice, "Excuse me, nothing stays hidden from me. Who are you really? I see you are one of those with no reason to fear the Mactira." Matha had no idea what she meant. His fear of them went beyond reason. She flopped off in her slow, ungainly way, without giving or receiving a parting word, and Matha was left more alone than he had ever been.